system that poorly serves society's health needs." End quote. Well, a timely post there. So what is that taken from? Is that a blog post by an outraged American citizen who is realizing that Obamacare is now raising premiums of the average American out there by as much as 539%? Or is this some sort of snapping point that one of the liberal blogs has reached in realizing that they have been duped and that healthcare, Obama style, is not manna from heaven, in which government somehow magically gives people medicine from on high because they care so much about them, but is in fact a fraud from top to bottom that has been designed to further plunder the wealth of the average American? No, actually, as a matter of fact, this is a section, in fact, the introduction to a book that was written in 1979 by E. Richard Brown, published by the University of California Press. That's right, people have been talking for decades and decades and decades now about how America's healthcare system is broken and is certainly not serving the needs of Americans, with the highest medical rates, the highest proportion of salaries, and the highest proportion of GDP being spent on healthcare in America in the entire world. This is obviously a problem of, well, excuse the pun, epidemic proportions. And the question is, how have we arrived at this spot? Well, there are some obvious answers to this, and some not-so-obvious answers. And one of the not-so-obvious answers that is being studiously avoided in the left-right farcical phony debate about Obamacare, which, as always, tries to spin things off into a phony left-right paradigm and a political agenda that doesn't really amount to any difference whatsoever. One thing that is studiously avoided is, well, speeches like this by Senator Max Baucus, who helped pass the Obamacare Act back in 2009, and who was at that time thanking some of the people who made that act possible.
And I want to single out one person. And that one person is sitting next to me. Her name is Liz Fowler. Liz Fowler is my chief health counsel. Liz Fowler has put my team together, the healthcare team. Liz Fowler worked for me many years ago, since left the private sector, and then came back when she realized that she could be there in the creation of healthcare reform, because she wanted to, in a certain sense, that to be her professional lifetime goal. She put together the white paper last November 2008, 87-page document, which became the basis, the foundation, the blueprint from which almost all healthcare measures and all bills, both sides of the aisle, came from. She's an amazing person. She's a lawyer. She's a PhD. She's just so decent. She's always smiling. She's always working. She's always available to help any senator, any staff. And I thank Liz from the bottom of my heart. And in many ways, she typifies, she represents all of the people who've worked so hard to make this bill such an accomplishment.
So what, you're thinking? So who is this Liz Fowler anyway, and why is it so important to be bringing up this, well, gushing and rather embarrassing praise from Senator Baucus on the House floor? Well, it's because Liz Fowler is not just someone who was formerly in private industry, as he tangentially made mention of in that speech, but someone who, well, had a very interesting history, and one that we can even pick up from mainstream sources like NBCnews.com, which had a post back a few years ago, "Fact or Fiction? Senate Chairman has ties to big insurer." Quote, "Elizabeth Fowler, now serving as counsel to Baucus on the Finance Committee, worked as an executive, not a lobbyist, for WellPoint, the largest publicly traded commercial health benefits company from 2006 to 2008. Prior to that, she'd worked for Baucus." Committee spokeswoman Erin Shields called Fowler one of the brightest healthcare minds in the Senate, and she and the Finance Committee staff have been working day and night to reach the goal of reform that lowers costs and ensures quality, affordable healthcare coverage, which is Baucus's priority. Shields added that the only factor that influences his decisions and the decisions of his staff is whether a policy is right for his state and for the American people. According to Senate records, Michelle Easton, former chief health counsel to the Finance Committee under Baucus, is lobbying for WellPoint for her firm, Tarplin, Downs & Young. End quote. Well, of course, that MSM post obviously downplays the important aspects of this. The fact that Liz Fowler, the person who Baucus was gushing about and who was absolutely essential in bringing the Affordable Care Act to the American public, was not just a lobbyist for for America and the world's largest publicly traded health benefits company, but was in fact an executive for them. And if we wanted to be even more specific, which oddly NBCNews.com decided not to be, she was a former vice president of WellPoint. So here we have someone in the very heart of the private insurance world coming in to write the very Affordable Care Act, which is supposed to provide all of this wonderful manna from heaven free healthcare to the public, except for the fact that it's going to cost the average American much, much, much more to get insured under this new regime. Here it is, unmasked for us all to see, the point at which the media has been studiously avoiding, which is that, yes, this is crony capitalism, aka fascism, aka corporatism, to its core. This is it for all the world to see. This is what it looks like, and this is exactly why healthcare costs in the United States are absolutely out of control and only getting worse as the government comes along to fix it and make it better with the help of their friends in WellPoint and other private health insurance companies. Absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that most people in the audience probably don't even know this fact is outrageous, considering the amount of coverage that the mainstream media has given Obamacare in recent months and recent years. And by coverage, of course, I mean cover up. Well, we could examine this in more detail today, but today I want to look more at the roots of this fascist corporatist system and how it developed, specifically with regards to the healthcare industry, because obviously that is something of pressing importance for Americans and people around the world in this day and age. And it's important to know that this did not come about through happenstance or mere chance. This happened as a result of a concerted and carefully plotted plan that was laid out generations ago by people with malice aforethought, we'll put it that way. And just for an example of how and when and why and who this plan developed and originated from, we should turn back to that book that we opened today with reading that short passage from the introduction. I mentioned it was by E. Richard Brown. It was published by University of California Press in 1979, but I did not mention the title of that book, which is Rockefeller Medicine Men, Medicine and Capitalism in America. Oh, that's right, folks. The American healthcare system really does go back to the Rockefeller family.
As the legislatures under Rockefeller's leadership, he set up the American League of Municipalities, which controlled all the small towns in the United States, and the American Association of State Governments, which controlled all the state governments in the United States, including the legislatures. And he used the state legislatures to draft new methods for controlling doctors and hospitals. And so all hospitals and all doctors had to be licensed through state legislature, which sounded wonderful if you didn't know what was going on. That you had to go through John D. Rockefeller to get a medical license and a hospital license.
Wow.
That's what it amounted to. And that's the system we have today. And today we've become the sickest nation in the world and the most expensive medical care in the world, except you never get well. Which seems to work out for everybody except the patients.
Works good for the doctors, doesn't it?
Good for the doctors. It's good
Drug
for
companies.
Oh, yeah. So everybody's happy except the poor patients. And whenever you go to a doctor today and he prescribes a medicine for you, he says, you're going to have to take this medication for the rest of your life, because it's against AMA principles to ever cure anybody. They've actually brought doctors up on charges of curing people. And they've drummed some of them out of the AMA for that very reason, because you're curing people. Because this might be the right thing to do, but from a business standpoint, it's better to keep them sick and keep them buying the medicine, which they buy from the Rockefeller drug companies, and go to the Rockefeller hospitals, and everybody's happy.
And now they have the scam where if you can't afford it, the government's going to buy the drugs from the Rockefellers and give it to you, right?
Well, that's why they had the Medicare system, because they developed Medicare. You know, I point out in my book, Murder by Injection, that for many years the AMA spent millions of dollars in Congress to fight Medicare. because it was called government medicine, and they didn't want, the doctors were very independent, and they didn't want the government to control their business. Well, they wound up as employees of the government, and that's what they are.
And now this new drug act, they're going to supply the drugs to the people that can't afford it with the taxpayers' money, but the drug companies will still get the money.
They get the money.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people who are buying drugs today and medications, like elderly people like myself, they couldn't afford the drugs, and so the government will pay for them.
What a racket.
Well, it shows that these people are good businessmen.
Oh, very good. Yeah. They're not very ethical, though.
Well, you and I could never think of such a diabolical plan.
Well, that's right. You and I never could think of such a diabolical plan, but unfortunately that doesn't stop those who can, and we suffer from a lack of imagination on many of these subjects, which makes us perfect victims for those who would so abuse positions of power and influence in order to increase one's own profitability. Well, that, of course, was a brief snippet of an interview with Eustace Mullins, and, of course, I'll put the link into the full video interview so you can watch that on YouTube, along with, of course, all of the other things that I mentioned in today's episode in the show notes at CorbettReport.com. But, well, this is a pretty grand claim to be making, that the Rockefellers were absolutely essential in shaping modern American medicine, and this could be cast aside as mere conspiracy theory by those who are not so familiar with the Rockefellers or their influence. And for example, I mean, just as one example of that, we could cast our minds back to The Last Word on Snake Oil, a video that I produced a couple of years ago, showing that the Rockefellers' roots, ironically enough, really does go back to medicine, aka fake medicine, aka snake oil, as the progenitor of the Rockefeller dynasty, John D. Rockefeller's father, was in fact not only a bigamist and a shuckster, but in fact also someone who literally sold snake oil, attempting to cure people's cancer. And billing himself as a doctor when he was in fact not a doctor. So the Rockefellers' roots and their first attempt at amassing a fortune really does go straight back to the idea of, well, attempting to cure people's cancer while doing nothing of the sort. That's just an ironic bit of history lesson, and I'll include the link into that video as well, so you can go and watch The Last Word on Snake Oil, which I think is still very relevant today. But again, there may be some who think, oh, Rockefeller, oh, you're just coming up with these crazy conspiracy theories. What do the Rockefellers have to do with medicine anyway?
How did working for a Nobel laureate at the Rockefeller University shape your science career?
So that was a pretty serendipitous event in my life. I knew I wanted to come back to New York City, and I was applying to postdoctoral positions in New York City. And a friend of mine at the time who was in New York City said to me, if you're going to go and do your postdoc there, you should go to the best possible place you can go, and that's the Rockefeller University. And for people who aren't familiar with it, the Rockefeller University is one of the most unique universities you'll ever come across. It doesn't have an undergraduate program. It has a graduate program and an MD, PhD program. It's small. It has no departments. It has no silos. It's unbelievably well funded. It's an amazing intellectual place. And I applied and got an interview in this guy, Paul Greengard's lab. I was interested in the stuff that he was doing. I went on my interview, gave a presentation, went out to dinner with him, and got the offer. And 5 months later, he won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. And I never could have known that that was going to happen when I accepted my position in the lab. And I always joked with him afterwards that it's good that I got in before he won the Nobel Prize, because after he got it, the applications to the lab were skyrocketing, and I always thought I would never get in. And he always said, yes, you would still get in, you would still get in. But that experience showed me the best of science. What's it like to be in one of the most world-renowned, successful laboratories? What's it like to be a scientist in a lab where funding isn't, the biggest issue, like it is in most labs?
Well, oh yes, I mean, that Rockefeller family, yes, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller University, yes, oh, okay, well, I mean, the Rockefeller name is associated with medicine, but not the family. I mean, they haven't had anything to do with it since the founding of the Rockefeller Foundation back in the early 20th century, right? Well, this is, of course, something that is not really controversial for anyone who's actually studied the literature on the subject, which continues to amass apace. In fact, earlier this year, there was a book released via the auspices of Guangxi Normal University Press, published by a Chinese scholar, entitled To Change China, the Rockefeller Foundation's Century-Long Journey in China, which notes that, again, the Rockefeller Foundation was absolutely essential in shaping modern Chinese medicine as well as the American medical system. And just reading from a short article on this on Global Times, it says, quote, "The concept of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, that stood in opposition to Western medicine developed in the late 19th century. Before that, Chinese doctors were open and flexible in their acceptance of Western treatments and ideas, but as Western techniques and theories outstripped Chinese ones and cultural conflicts developed, the idea that traditional Chinese treatments were either outdated or needed to be defended developed, culminating in a division of Chinese medical practitioners into Western and Chinese medicine by the 1920s. In her book To Change China, the Rockefeller Foundation's Century-Long Journey in China, just published in Chinese, Ma Qiuxia, Associate Professor of East Asian Studies at Oberlin College, holds that NGOs, especially the Rockefeller Foundation, contributed to this process. The basis of Western modern philanthropy that had been established, and the West was moving toward modern ideals of evidence-based medicine when the Rockefeller Foundation, endowed by billionaire John D. Rockefeller, entered China in the early 20th century. With the spreading of the missionary movements, Rockefeller became increasingly interested in China. His foundation bought the Union Medical School and renamed it the Peking Union Medical College. The foundation not just wanted to establish a first-class school of medicine in China, it also introduced the U.S. Johns Hopkins medical model to the Peking Union Medical College Hospital and viewed it as a laboratory of their social ideas, which reflects the foundation's ambition to change China." End quote. I'll let you continue reading on that subject and reading the book if you are so inclined, but that's just one indication of the massive global reach that the Rockefeller family and the Rockefeller Foundation had, very much so in the early 20th century, and which continues to shape the societal and educational and medical and all sorts of other institutional practices and institutions themselves to this very day, as reflected by the previous clip that we just watched. But again, it's not a conspiracy, and it's very much documented history how the Rockefeller Foundation, in cooperation with some of the other corporate foundations that developed via the auspices of the robber barons of the 19th century, had a profound effect on shaping American medical discourse in the late 19th, early 20th century. And again, this has been documented many times, many ways, in many places by many people. So let's take a look at just one example of that goes towards explaining how the modern system of allopathic medicine, as opposed to homeopathic medicine, developed as a result of the Rockefellers and their influence.
The answer to this question may be found in some historic events that took place almost a century ago, when official medicine finally managed to gain the upper hand on the so-called empirical doctors, who cured patients with herbs and natural remedies.
In the 1800s, society sanctioned both approaches to healing. Patients had a choice of using either doctors, called allopaths, or natural healers, called empirics or homeopaths. The two groups waged a bitter philosophical debate. The allopathic doctors called their approach heroic medicine. They believed the physician must aggressively drive disease from the body. They based their practice on what they considered scientific theory. The allopaths used three main techniques. They bled the body to drain out the bad humors. They gave huge doses of toxic minerals like mercury and lead to displace the original disease. They also used surgery, but it was a brutal procedure before anesthesia and infection control. Few patients were willing to have surgery. Most patients feared allopathic methods altogether. Satirists of the day remarked that with allopathic treatment, the patient died of the cure. Competing with the doctors were the empiric healers. Contrary to the doctors, they believed in stimulating the body's own defenses to heal itself. Instead of poisonous minerals, they used vegetable products and non-toxic substances in small quantities. They especially favored herbs learned from Native American and old European traditions. The empirics said they based their remedies not on theory, but on observation and experience. Satirists of the day added that with empiric treatment, the patient died of the disease, not the cure. And the balance of medical power remained equal until the turn of the century. Then, new medical treatments emerged that were potentially very profitable. The AMA joined with strong financial forces to transform medicine into an industry. The fortunes of Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller financed surgery, radiation, and synthetic drugs. They were to become the economic foundations of the new medical economy.
The takeover of the medical industry was accomplished by the takeover of the medical schools. Well, the people that we're talking about, Rockefeller and Carnegie in particular, came to the picture and said, we will put up money. They offered tremendous amounts of money to the schools that would agree to cooperate with them. The donors said to the schools, we're giving you all this money. Now, would it be too much to ask if we could put some of our people on your board of directors to see that our money is being spent wisely? Almost overnight, all of the major universities received large grants from these sources and also accepted 1, 2, or 3 of these people that I mentioned on their board of directors, and the schools literally were taken over by the financial interests that put up the money. Now, what happened as a result of that is that the schools did receive an infusion of money. They were able to build new buildings. They were able to add expensive equipment to their laboratories. They were able to hire top-notch